Mike Sheridan here. In today's video, I'm going to explain why we're not born to run. And yes, I know this is a hard pill to swallow for marathoners and triathletes who like to believe persistent hunting is what made us human. Apparently, our unique ability to chase an animal until he tires is how we're able to access meat and how we became human. But as you'll discover, that's just not the case. I've consulted with and chatted with many endurance athletes and running enthusiasts over the years. And no matter how much information I share on the superiority of highly intense exercise as a form of cardiovascular training, or the superiority of resistance training or weight training to build strength and muscle and improve your health, or even the negatives of doing too much cardio and training for marathons and triathlons, the conversation always seems to end up at this idea that we're born to run, as apparently this book provided undeniable proof that we're genetically predisposed to run long distances. Yes, there's evidence to suggest that persistent hunting was an infrequent activity that some of the tribes we descended from took part in. But as you'll discover, there's three much stronger hypotheses to explain what moved us from jungle to savanna, transitioned us from four legs to two, and hominid to human, and plenty of explanation for how we were able to access meat without the ability to chase an animal till he tires. But perhaps more important is that none of this evidence suggests that we should be taking part in long-distance running to the extent that marathoners and triathlons do, whether that's the marathon and triathlon itself or the training leading up to it. To appreciate some of the evolutionary traits that are unique to Homo sapiens, it's important to understand why we moved from quadruped to biped, or from four legs to two. It's still a question that remains unanswered officially, and there are actually 10 theories on the subject, but the majority of credible evidence appears to point to some sort of transition from jungle to savanna and an increased need for consistent travel. The obvious advantage of being on two legs is an increased field of vision, either to scout out prey and resources or for a much needed warning of approaching predators. And interestingly, this fits into the explanation from Born to Run that says our slowness is why we run far. Though it seems to make a lot more sense to say that our slowness is why we stand on two legs, as even when we were on four legs, we were significantly slower. The second advantage of bipedalism, or being on two legs, is to free up the arms, which makes sense when looking at an increased need to carry extra supplies, whether that's food, water, or other resources across the scarce savanna. The third thing that's clear is that walking efficiency and heat regulation would be more important environmental advantages during these long treks. So it's not surprising to see that they make up two of the popular evolutionary theories explaining the shift to two legs: the travel efficiency hypothesis and the thermoregulatory model. Now, marathoners and endurance enthusiasts will try to say the superior efficiency of two legs for covering long distances means we should be running, but when looking at the transition from four legs, it's clear that we gain this genetic adaptation to be better walkers, with bipedal walking being 75% more efficient than quadruped walking in comparison to running, which is more efficient for the quadruped or the four-legger. So if we were born to run, wouldn't it make sense to go back to four legs? The book also tries to take credit for humans' unique ability to thermoregulate, which is the third hypothesis I mentioned. Even though this trait appears to coincide with the switch to 2 legs. Evolutionary biologist Peter Wheeler explains that bipedalism decreases the body's surface that's close to the hot desert floor and helps us access cooler winds and release more heat. This, compared to a 4-legged creature, also exposes upright humans to less direct overhead sun exposure. Outside of the transition from 4 legs to 2, books like Born to Run and their 4-minute mile following would have you believing that the skeleton on the left of your screen was formed based on generations of adaptations that can be linked to persistent hunting. Even though it looks like, to the naked eye, we continued to improve upon the genetic adaptations that brought us to 2 legs in the first place. The first thing to note is our advantageous view of the savanna and distance from the hot ground, which continued to increase. We also grew longer legs for bigger steps and smaller arms for less dead weight while walking. Knowing what we now know about the introduction of meat during this time period, it's also clear that we continued to trade in our large ape-like gut for a smaller stomach and a bigger brain. Harvard researcher Daniel Lieberman is commonly referenced to make connections between persistent hunting and our adaptations from hominid to human, the skeleton that was on the right of the screen to the one on the left. But when you take an honest look at the evidence he presents, which I believe he actually did on a TED Talk, all of his points can be explained by improved thermoregulation, walking efficiency, and the switch to 2 legs from 4 in the first place. For instance, here's a list of the characteristics often presented by Lieberman that are apparently related to endurance running. Spring-like arches and short toes, long legs and big glutes, large joints in the legs and spine, a nuchal ligament connecting head to neck, lower and wider shoulders that are decoupled from the head, elaboration of sweat glands, and loss of body fur. And now I'll go through each one and explain why those are all related to the 3 hypotheses mentioned earlier. The reason our feet were reshaped is so we could stand and walk better. We traded in large grasping toes for a bigger weight-bearing heel and developed an arch to efficiently transfer weight and propel us forward during walking. Our large supportive hind legs were also designed for standing and walking, as the hips were reshaped to bring the spine closer and make room for the glutes. The knees increased in size for more load-bearing potential, and the thighs were turned inwards to position the knees directly under the body, not only giving us more stability, but differentiating us from the ape who struggles to stand upright for long periods of time. When walking, the heavy tree-swinging arms for an ape are a nuisance, which is why we opted for bigger glutes to hold us upright and longer legs to propel us forward while walking. What's interesting is that we're not really designed to use our arms much while walking, as the natural swing of our long legs and push from the ankle means very little muscle activity is necessary from the upper body. Instead, the new human is made to carry and manipulate objects with precision. As for the nuchal ligament, which you can think of as a bobblehead, it seems that this has more to do with holding up an ever-expanding heavy brain. And sure, it's not present in mammals that don't run, but it's also present in mammals that don't run long distances or often, like sheep and cows. We've seen these head balancing adaptations in the neck and spine occurring since the shift to 2 legs. With the foramen magnum, or the hole in the skull where the spinal cord attaches, moving further underneath the head to transfer more of the weight behind the spine, and a lumbar or lower back and thoracic upper back curve to bring the center of gravity over our feet and prevent a forward lean. And yes, we can run, so a nuchal ligament would come in handy to balance our ginormous head. But it's quite far-fetched to say this is why we should run, even if you are a runner. Now, I'm not here to trash Daniel Lieberman, as I think him and his colleagues' research is definitely interesting, especially when looking at the collision force comparing barefoot and shoe-wearing runners. As you know, I'm a huge advocate of going barefoot and taking your shoes off. But with respect to this born to run theory, it seems they're trying very hard to attach two-legged or bipedal advancements to this persistent hunting hypothesis. Even when looking at the loss of body fur, changes in shoulder structure and sweat gland improvements, these can all be explained by a shift from a shoulder stable quadruped to a shoulder mobile biped. And this has continued to progress in thermal regulation. So now that brings us to the million-dollar question, which is how we accessed meat. Basically, we started standing up approximately 4 million years ago, and somewhere between then and now we developed a larger human brain and more intelligent tools to hunt, cook, and eat. So the mind-bending fact for scientists was that it appeared we were acquiring meat and growing our big juicy brains long before we developed the tools, which led them to ask one of the greatest evolutionary questions: in how the heck did we get the meat without the tools? We're slow, we don't have claws, and the beasts we were hunting could definitely outmuscle us. So how would we get close enough, and what would we do to kill the animal if we did? Now, the endurance athletes will tell you we stumbled upon persistent hunting after realizing we could outlast these faster animals by chasing them until they tire, with evidence for this theory somewhat supported with the observations of the sand people or Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, which was one of 14 tribes that humans are said to have evolved from that still practice this hunting technique today. So, like I said at the start, persistent hunting definitely exists, and we're more than capable of taking part in it. But does that mean this behavior is what facilitated the transition from a small brain on two legs to a big brain on two legs? And this hunting technique should get all of the credit for introducing meat to the hominid not yet human? Because the big-armed bipedal tree climber never would have come across an animal protein source? Recent evidence from Johns Hopkins University, which was published in 2010 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, shows that Pliocene hominins were consuming a variety of aquatic animals like turtles, fish, and crocodiles before the appearance of the well-adapted human frame, or Homo erectus. And there's other evidence that's shown even the chimpanzee was scarfing down meat before the running man came along, with some studies suggesting daily intakes of as much as 65 grams per day for the chimpanzee in the dry season. And similar to hominins, they also supplemented whatever protein and fat rich insects they could find. So when you think about it, it's almost insulting to say that we're incapable of scavenging like a crow, waiting for predators to leave and picking away at whatever was left on the bones, or grabbing what we could and using our bipedal advantage to carry it to safety for consumption. As even the Neanderthal, that is commonly but wrongfully looked at as dumber than humans, found a way to hunt for meat without the ability to run, with evidence from 2010 also in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showing that they commonly consume birds. But all that said, the question of how we got meat before tools may not even be worth answering to begin with, as more and more research continues to surface that we had tools much earlier than was originally thought, with the first evidence coming in 2003 in the Journal of Human Evolution showing 2.5 million year old tool use, and a recent study from 2010 showing stone tool use in Ethiopia approximately 3.4 million years ago, suggesting that the tools were in our hands long before we were human. All that said, the biggest knock against the born to run theory, or the persistent running theory, is that the earliest members of the Homo group lived in a mixed environment of jungle and savanna, not only making persistent hunting less of a necessity, but making it less possible, since trees and roughage would become obstacles and reduce vision. But even for argument's sake, let's pretend persistent hunting helped us access the nutrients that grew our big brains and made humans what they are today. Does this mean it makes sense to use running as our predominant form of exercise and start training for and running in marathons? After watching the videos of the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, it's clear that persistent tracking techniques definitely exist, but they're slightly different than the ultra-endurance enthusiasts or the story of the Terra Humera in Born to Run would have you believing. First of all, it's usually a single tribesman that engages in the tracking. Plus, it tends to include a lot more walking and watching than it does consistently running at a moderate intensity pace for miles and miles. For instance, researchers Pickering and Bunn shared observations of persistent hunts by the Hadza in their 2007 paper in the Journal of Human Evolution, and noted relentless walking after an animal and forcing it away from shady areas for 3 hours until it was exhausted. The second point is that it appears to be a very infrequent occasion, with one large kill from a tribe feeding them for quite some time, which would mean hunts were a couple times a year at most, and this would also imply that a lot of people, like women and children, would never have done any persistent hunting. And the men that actually did the hunting maybe did one hunt annually, with one every couple of years probably being more realistic. So even if we forget about whether we're uniquely designed to do this, it's clear that 20 miles a week and 3 marathons a year that's characteristic of the endurance enthusiasts is nothing like persistent hunting. And if we're talking about what we're born to do, it's a mistake to prioritize this extremely rare persistent hunting regimen while neglecting the activities they used to be a daily occurrence, like walking, climbing, crouching, and carrying. When you think about it, saying we're born to run is kind of like saying we're born to starve. As clearly we're capable of chasing an animal till he tires and going weeks without food, but that doesn't mean it's a necessity. The funny thing is, the first thing these early humans did once they grew larger brains was stop jogging. Compared to today, where we have the largest brain in history, and we've convinced ourselves that jogging is a necessity. Thanks for watching.